It's passion, it's desire, it's a work ethic. It's all those things. And once you taste that, once you become part of that, you don't want to be anywhere else. You don't want to stick with it or go to another brand. You want to be part of Arctic Cat.
Arctic Cat first started building snowmobiles in 1962. And so began a lifelong passion for legions of riders who found themselves hooked on both the sport of snowmobiling and the Arctic Cat brand. 50 years later, that love affair has grown into a fiercely loyal group of snowmobile and ATV riders, and a company whose people share the same crazy, unbridled passion.
The amazing story of Arctic Cat, it's about machines for sure, but it's, I think more it's about people. And it's about the people who made the machines, and it's about the people who rode the machines.
And it all began as one man's dream.
Who's Edgar Hateen?
What?
Who's Edgar Hateen?
He's the founder of Arctic Cat.
Edgar and Alan, of course, had the teen hoist and derrick, and Edgar and Alan decided that they needed something to do in the wintertime. They needed to build a product in the winter to keep their people employed. And of course, there was nothing to do in the winter, so they built these rudimentary, crude machines to start with. And Edgar came with the idea that in order for this thing to really take off, it needed to be a recreational piece of equipment. And Alan was convinced it would only be an industrial thing. It would be for hunters, trappers, fishermen, power lines.
Having a recreational experience with snowmobiles versus utility, which is what snowmobiles were when he started in '61, that's a vision, that's creativity.
So the two parted company, and I don't think it was a real amiable parting. And Edgar went to Thief River, bought the old creamery building, and started building Arctic Cats.
His idea of having a recreational experience with your friends moved him to build that smaller snowmobile.
And this is the famous Model 100, the first cat with front engine mount. Sort of the Tin Lizzie of the snowmobile world.
Tin Lizzie was the first sport model designed specifically for recreational use. It was also the first sled to bear the name Arctic Cat.
There were 4 or 5 people at Poland Manufacturing at that time, and I stopped and asked if there was any work. Edgar was down in the basement. He was nailing a snowmobile crate together. Not very talkative when I showed up, but the telephone rang and Mary came and said, Edgar, you got a telephone call. And of course I suppose he was doing everything in those days, you know. Well, he never came back, and that crate was sitting there, and he dropped his nail apron by the crate. I stood there for a while, and I thought, well, this is kind of crazy. Why don't I just grabbed the nail apron and put it on, and I hammered the crate together. And when Edgar came back, he said, what was it you were wanting now? And I said, I'm looking for employment, I said. He looked at the crate and he said, well, when can you start? He said.
A couple of years later, the eager young man had moved into product development. Edgar's pupil was learning rapidly.
He had ideas, and he had experimented with those ideas, and if it didn't do what he wanted to do, he had a way of going after it and saying, well, now I've looked at it this way, let's try this. So very inquisitive, very creative guy, and I can't say that I'm a real creative guy, but I really appreciate folks who think out of the box, and I like to be around folks that think out of the box, and Edgar was one of those guys.
Snowmobiles were just in their infancy, But Roger and the other young minds at Arctic Enterprises were about to change all that.
There used to be a race in Roseau every year. Our 140 Deluxe had 8-horse Kohler in it, and then I can remember sticking a 300 Herth in it one time and going to Roseau to race. And of course there was no suspension to speak of in that 140, but with a 2-stroke engine in it, it traveled and moved over the snow considerably faster than it did with an 8-horse. So I can remember going there and started out from the fairgrounds, and it wasn't very far to the river. The speed was way more than what I was used to at 8-horse. And I think I fell off 13 times before we got to the river. And that's when we came back and started thinking about, we need a snowmobile that can travel faster, but in control. And that was the start of the Panther snowmobile. It was a considerable departure, the Panther was. The idea of it was to take the motor off of the tunnel, stick it down in front of the tunnel between the steering and the track. And then we built a rear suspension that was spring biased instead of just a set of rails. Those rails spring biased to the front arm and the rear arm to the tunnel. And that was the beginning of our suspension system, our skid frames. I remember the first prototypes, they had red hoods on it, flip-up hoods, you know. And then we decided to make it black, and then it got its name Panther from being black. Had a leopard skin seat on it. So it was a Panther.
The Panther, with its revolutionary slide rail suspension system, would change the snowmobile industry forever. And it brought change to Arctic Cat as well.
1965, we had the first prototypes of the Panthers, and in 66 we built a few, and then we started building 67, 68. By 72, we'd built just about 112,000, and they were all Panthers.
When I first came to Arctic Enterprises, I was just in awe over these beautiful black and silver Panthers and Pumas coming down that assembly line, and I thought, wish I could have had one of these.
By the time the new Panther was introduced, a decorated World War II aviator and former CPA named Lowell Swenson put everything he had on the line and bought the company from Edgar Hattine.
Lowell understood business, and he understood sales, and he understood people, but different contribution and a different personality than Edgar. And Lowell was very good for the business.
One of Lowell's first moves was to bring in a young engineer from Minneapolis named Bill Ness to head the growing engineering department.
He brought in Bill Ness, and I had the privilege of working with Bill Ness for many years. Bill was a degreed electrical engineer. He was a graduate of UND, and so he had engineering training that I didn't have, and so I really appreciated the years that I was able to work with Bill.
The snowmobile industry was taking off, and so was Arctic Cat.
When I started in '67, it had grown a lot. There was quite a big assembly line. It was HR, and it was payroll, and it was accounting, and it was, it was already a pretty big business. It grew rapidly.
Everybody was snowmobiling, whether it was ice fishing or snowmobile trails, snowmobile clubs. It was very popular. We had I think it was over 100 manufacturers at one time making snowmobiles. And the big four had the majority of the sales. We were geared up for sales of over 100,000 units a year, and we couldn't make them fast enough.
It's 175 carts, and it went in a big circle like this here around, like that. And if you go back there now, like I said, you could see grooves about that deep in there in certain places that they made, that the wheels worked into it. They did their own belly pants. They did that. They made their hoods out of fiberglass. Their belly pants were made out of fiberglass. They had to roll them out. They did all of that here. But then they did their own decaling here. They built practically everything right here, pretty much.
Bill Ness created the little Arctic cat head icon. And that was really the beginning of Arctic wear.
Well, in the late 60s, it started out as a basic one-piece black suit. It was black, black, or black. And then we got into the ladies' one-piece suits. We had white suits, purple suits, green suits. And then about the mid-70s, it transferred into two-piece garments. The two-piece got to be very popular, a jacket and pant combination. But we also had all the boots, goggles, gloves, helmets. It was really taking off.
My earliest recollection is in 1970. We came out with the PMS 275 pink or purple. I think that hung around for about 4 or 5 years until we came out with the lime green.
So at one time we had 3 plants cooking, making about 1,000 garments a day. And so much of our clothing was fashioned after the sleds. There weren't any aftermarket people in the business at that time. And Arctic Cat was the only snowmobile company that made its own clothing.
One of my jobs was to mount up engines. We had the Panther chassis, but we had sales for so many that we couldn't get engines. We mounted up Sachs engines, JLO engines, Herth engines, Robin engines, Wankel engines. I mean, the list just went on and on.
Every year we changed 99% of the line, all the accessories, the helmets, goggles, gloves, all the parts, everything would change.
We outgrew the plant by the dam. The business was growing so rapidly that we outgrew that pretty quickly, and they built the complex that we have now.
In 1969, Arctic Enterprises was looking for a summer product to help stabilize sales. So they acquired Silver Line boats out of Moorhead, Minnesota. By the mid-70s, if it had an engine, it seemed like Arctic Cat was making it.
We had first just the snowmobiles, but we rapidly expanded into marine and motorized vehicles like mini bikes and then bicycles and then lawn and garden products and snow blowers and then more boats and wet bikes and trailers and then outboard motors and more boats. About that time, Arctic Marine was generating about half the revenue of the company, and Arctic Snowmobiles was about half.
Brimming with success, it appeared the rapidly expanding company couldn't spend money fast enough.
At that time, you have to remember, Arctic was doing pretty well, so we had some cash. So we went out and bought several quilting machines. We did our own quilting in Carlsted, which was state-of-the-art at that time. We had our own embroidery machines, which compared to today's seemed kind of antiquated, but for then it was really something to do your own embroidery. And all our sewing machines were, again, state-of-the-art, the best equipment that we could buy.
A huge, powerful factory racing team was built. Big budget marketing materials were being produced. It was an exciting time at Arctic Enterprises.
Every year we had a different theme. Good times are coming on the Cat. This is the year of the Cat. The Spirit's gonna move you. All these different logos, and every year we had a different song. And everybody in the factory knew the songs and wore the clothing, and there was a lot of Cat's pride. It was a good time.
The Arctic Cat. It's one of a kind. You know it, and so does everybody else. The Cat's king of the hill. But we're not resting on our laurels. We're still setting the pace. We like it up here. So will you.
Get on the cat, the one and only cat.
There was a dealer show at that time that they took a cruise, and they painted the cruise ship purple. They took a cruise ship out of Florida, and they had painted the cruise ship purple. And when they came back in, they had to repaint it black again, because of course the cruise people didn't want a purple ship. So Arctic had painted that ship purple. We had 3 planes at that time, whether it was the races in Eagle River, whether it was visiting distributors. We had our own planes, our own pilots, and they flew people wherever they wanted to go.
With this newfound success came the desire to show it off. Sleek, futuristic drag racing sleds were built to set speed records.
Edgar said it one time, he said, racing started when the second snowmobile was built, and it's true, because as soon as you get 2 of the same kind or even a different kind and you go out in the field and line up, you race.
They say it started in a field in Wisconsin. Nobody remembers who won, and winning was the only prize. Now they race in 100 towns wherever it snows. Now the winners are not just faces, but names. And now the prize is money. They gather in the race towns for the money and for the fame, but most of all for the winning, because winning is still what it's really all about.
Snowmobiles were still in their infancy when the community of Eagle River, Wisconsin, planned a racing event to help boost the economy during the winter months. Called the World Championship Snowmobile Derby, it became the biggest event in oval ice racing. One of the winners at that first event was Roger Skye.
Racing and winning, I've said it before, it isn't everything, it's the only thing. And snowmobiles are different to me than racing cars. You feel a part. You don't just sit on and drive it. It becomes an extension of your body. And you move it around with your body. So when you have skills to move it around and your skills are better than somebody else's skills to move it around, you're going to win.
In the 1960s, most events were cross-country races. The I-500, which ran from Winnipeg, Manitoba to St. Paul, Minnesota, quickly became the most coveted race to win.
It was put on by the Winter Carnival, and there was years where if you didn't have your entry in by the middle of July, you didn't get in. There'd be up to 450 machines in this event. And it was worth millions to a manufacturer to win this event. It made you credible. You know, if you had the machine that could win this race, it sold product. It sold tens of thousands of snowmobiles. I mean, you were the best. You were the leader in the snowmobile industry if you could win that event. So they spent, whatever it took to win it. You know, we had unlimited budgets. Whatever we needed, we would get.
The grueling race became legendary, and it certainly helped the credibility of the Panther and its groundbreaking slide rail suspension when Dale Cormican won the race back-to-back in 1968 and 1969. 69 was also the first time an Arctic Cat was crowned world champion in Eagle River, when the Bullet Roger Jansen won. It would be another 10 years before Team Arctic would capture that elusive title. By the late 60s, Eagle River and the I-500 had become the biggest events. But there were many others, as the sport of snowmobile racing caught on like wildfire.
It was great. I mean, there were sleds all over. We were making a lot of sleds, a lot of race teams. You name it, they all had a race team.
And they all brought their semis to the race, and they all came out of the semi like rock stars, and it was big multi-million-dollar budgets.
And it was something that still was new, to the people. something that they looked at as, wow, you know, we gotta go watch this.
30, 40,000 people screaming and watching these guys turn left, you know. Going to Eagle River was absolutely something else.
In 1976, you did not have to look far for the best drivers. They all came from the same team. They dominated professional snowmobile racing like Ferrari dominated Grand Prix. They wore the colors of Arctic Cat, and their names became known to all race fans. Dave Thompson, injured at Eagle River but now ready for his best year. Bob Elsner, the newest team member, he would be runner-up for Driver of the Year. And Larry Colton, 1976 Snow Pro Driver of the Year. Can this machine, this Arctic Cat, which started as one man's dream, carry the dream of another?
My teammates are always the ones to beat. I can remember Larry Colton beating me by a ski length many times. You know, I would probably be ahead for 9 3/4 lap, and he would follow me in.
And then there's number 64, Larry Colton. What does it take to consistently win week after week against the best?
Well, first of all, you got to have the desire to win.
I think one of the most memorable ones was Milwaukee. It was what they call the 40-40. It was 40 laps, 40 sleds. Funny thing about it is that I had a 3-cylinder. I wanted to, it was a big track, it was a mile track, and I wanted to have a high horsepower, high speed sled. Well, evidently I didn't make it. I had engine troubles. It burnt the piston. Didn't qualify, so I had a 540 twin, big bore twin that I had made for a backup sled. Went out and qualified that, made a lap and burned that one down. And so I ended up with a 440. So I went out there and made my laps with it, and of course that old thing would run forever. I ended up qualifying dead last, but I got in, number 40 sled. So come Sunday when they had the race, you know, we lined up, and of course I think there was 10 rows of 4, and I was in the 10th row way back. And I thought, well, I'll just hang back here. It'd be so much snow dust you can't see nothing anyway. So when the flag dropped, we went around the first number 1 and number 2, and I had to stand up on my sled to see where I was going, and there was sleds going here and there, and 13 sleds went out the first 2 laps. But I didn't have any trouble. I mean, I'd just keep going around and around, and the big sleds would be full off with blowing belts and different things. And after 40, actually I made 41 laps because I didn't see the flag man. There was so much snow there. And I ended up winning it. Only because of, you know, just continuous laps with no troubles, no issues. So.
In 1974, Marv Odie won the 3rd I-500 title for Arctic Cat on an El Tigre. Brian Nelson duplicated that feat in 1978 with a new cross-country race sled he helped develop.
That race there in '78, it was 4 days. We went from Winnipeg to St. Paul. We never even worried about anybody else. It was, how do we beat Polaris? At the end of the first day, I was in 4th. At the end of the second day, I was in 3rd. At the end of the 3rd day, when we came into Alec, I was 2nd. It was a neat race because there was a lot of color. It was the first time in years where I think there was 5 manufacturers in that first flight, and any one of them could have won the race. And we took off, and the pack of 10 pretty well stayed in a bunch all the way to the first gas stop. We'd get in the ditches, and my Arctic Cat had better suspension. We had the best suspension in the race, but we weren't quite as fast. We didn't have as efficient of a driveline as some of the other brands. But so we'd get up on the roads, they'd pass me. We'd get in the ditches, I'd pass them back again. It was just a battle. And we came into the first gas stop, all 10 sleds, and I roared in. There was a guy in a cat suit, and boom, he fueled me, and I was out of there. So I was the first one out of the gas stop. And I pulled out in the ditch, and I looked on my bumper, and there's that John Deere, my buddy Ron. Now, I had a minute on him in corrected time, so I had to keep him back there. And I looked right in his eyes. He was 2 feet behind me, and I stood up and I looked, and I looked at him, and you could just see He wanted it, and I had just made up my mind. It wasn't going to be his day. It wasn't going to happen. I said to myself, you know, you're not going to pass me today. And I just put it wide open, and away we went. We were going so fast, the other 8 sleds couldn't keep up. We just left them. And we were hitting these road approaches and not even burping the throttle, just flat out. We went about 20 miles like that, and Ron was right alongside of me, and we came to this road approach. And on the old leaf spring sleds, if you bottomed out hard, you'd go over backwards. And we hit this approach side by side, and over he went. I mean, he was right, you know, right next to me, and he bottomed out hard, and he blew over backwards. And I looked back, and I didn't see any sleds for miles because we had been going so hard. So I slowed down just to what you might call a sane pace, you know, where you burp the throttle a little bit when you come to an approach. Went about 20 miles, and I looked, and there was that Suburban. I looked behind me, and there's that John Deere again. And he wanted by, and I said, nope, not going to happen. And so away we went again. We went about another 25, 30 miles. We were coming into a little town called Zimmerman. And we came up by this big steep ditch, and I got up on the inslope, and he went on the field side. We were coming in this parking lot, and he hit something hard, and he put it on the roof again. He flipped her over backwards again. And, you know, I got into the second gas stop, and I took off, and I'm going down this road. I was probably about 40 miles from St. Paul. And here come that John Deere. He caught me again, the third time. And when you're going down a road, there's nothing you can do. You know, I was running about, my little cat would run about 87. I had the windshield pulled back, and I'm all tucked in trying to be aerodynamic, and he, you know, he'd run about 90, and he drove right by me. And we went, then they marked us off the road through this big cattail swamp. Well, he went off the road right ahead of me, and I landed on a big rock in this cattail swamp. I couldn't see it. And it bent the belly pan, it bent the skis. The skis were towed out like that. It bent my drive shaft. Now, he didn't know I hit that rock, see. All he knew was we had about 30 miles to go, and he had to make up a minute on me. He had to get me out of sight. So we went through the swamp and got up in the road, and my speed went from 87 to 65, and I didn't think I'd even finish. I thought the chain would break. So I'm going down this road, and right at the top of the hill, they'd marked it back in the ditch, and there was an approach there. And I hit the approach, and I flew through the air. As I'm flying through there was Ron. He had hit the approach going 90 and just went for a nasty crash. He was laying right by the left ski with his feet going down the trail, and I landed right alongside of him, you know, because I was in his track. And I just about hit him, but I landed like a foot to the left of him, and I remember looking down in his eyes, and they were shut. He had knocked himself out. And I figured, man, it's just my lucky day. And pretty soon we got into St. Paul, and you know, we finished and won the race. We won because we had the suspension. We had, I mean, I could hold it wide open and stay on the sled, and nobody else could.
Team Arctic had a lot of success racing cross country in the 70s, but they also dominated the ice ovals.
Neither Arctic Cat nor Edgar Hattin ever set out to build machines to simply win races. Competition was testing, always working to improve the consumer sled. But that is not the goal today. Today the goal is to win this race for Larry Colton, to win for Arctic Cat, and to win the Hattin Cup for Edgar. Sometimes there's nothing in the world more important than winning.
1976 Snow Pro Oval race season happening, and Elsner and Thompson and Colton, these guys smoked everybody. They were amazing and won it all. They won the Snow Pro Championship, and you know, they came into the 77 season, you know, feeling pretty good. And so they started the season with leaf spring front suspension like everybody else, but one other brand comes off with IFS, and they were better. And so Arctic Cat goes, that first race gets beat, goes back to engineering and says, we're going to build a front suspension, we're going to put it on this thing, and we're going to have it in a couple of races. And you know, that's a process that would normally take 1-2 years, and these guys do it in the shop in a matter of weeks. And I think that speaks volumes about how much they cared and how much it meant to them to be number one.
I went to Arctic that first year, I think in the middle of summer, and helped work with David Thompson to build the machines. The suspension systems in snowmobiles had changed significantly. Went from what we'll call leaf spring sleds to IFS sleds, or independent front ends. The machines were drastically different. Very quick moving, a lot of travel, very light, and the object was to have a machine that would steer and turn much faster and at a faster speed. Arctic Cat had a test track that was just outside the door of our race shop, and we unloaded this brand new 440 machine that we had been working on diligently. It was the first one to get done in the shop. We unloaded the machine, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you mind if I take it for its first ride, Jim?" And I said, "Hey, you earned this, man, by all means." So we unloaded it, he put his helmet on, started to sled up, and at that time, in the early days, when you went to go take off with a sled, you would stand on the back of the machine and pound on it with your feet to set the studs into the ground so you would get a good transfer and good traction. He did that, and he hit the throttle, and this machine literally stood straight up in the air, came back down to the ground, lost traction, grabbed again, went down, and on its third porpoise, it went up and went over and crashed onto the machine, onto the test track, just 40 feet in front of me. David was on the ground, got up and shuffled himself. Of course, he knew what he had done, and he was just, furious with himself. And my eyes were like saucers to think, this is what you guys hired me for? This is what the sled's going to be like, and he was fine. And anyhow, the story came out as to what we did, and that he had stood on the back of it, and the rumor or the rule went through the shop that we would never stand on the back of the sleds again. We would sit in the seat when we took off. So that was true until 1979, and Elsner stood on the back of one, and he also fell off, and he fell off at Eagle River. But other than that, that was the only other time.
Despite all the racing success of the factory team, one title had eluded them since 1969, World Champion. Year after year, Arctic Cat racers would win many classes, only to come up empty in the championship. 10 years later, in 1979, it appeared they had run out of luck again.
Two men drive for Arctic Cat. Jim Dimmerman, number 5, Bob Elsner, number 1. Coming to the line for the World's Championship race, Elsner and Dimmerman have the fastest qualifying times, positions 1 and 2. Both machines are running well, both men well prepared. The races are ready. Suddenly, two drivers seem to jump the flag, tearing down the track into the first turn, far ahead of the other drivers. Dimmerman, thinking the race will be restarted, rides easily around, far back to the leaders. Elsner holds his position. Both anticipate the red flag, which will mean a restart. But the flag is not red. It's green, and the race is on. Careful planning, the hours of work, the strategy, the training, has all been thrown aside by this cruel twist. Elsner now pushes all thoughts from his mind, save one, to get the lead and hold it. There's no reason now to save himself or his machine. The dream is here. The dream is now. There's only one machine blocking the way. Elsner has worked too hard to give it up, has waited too long to let it go. Half a lap ahead, Elsner stretches it out. It's all his if he can hold it. He looks behind to see who might be challenged. There is no one. Ahead, the smooth, open surface he knows so well. Beneath him, the machine he put together piece by piece. It is here, to this place, on this machine, this Arctic Cat, his dream has been leading. He could slow now, protect his lead. but his hand will not come off the throttle. He has waited too long. This is not just a man and his dream. It is the process. One more time. With one lap to go, Elsner charges the finish line, as Colton did, as Lofton did, as Thompson did, as they all did. This is Team Arctic, doing what it has always done, catching up a dream and making it shine.
In 1979, Team Arctic found themselves taking on another tough competitor. The hard-nosed opponent, oddly enough, was another team fielded by Arctic Enterprises, Scorpion. The brand had been acquired at the start of the racing season, but the Scorpion race team quickly proved to be more than worthy.
The Scorpion race sled was basically an Arctic Cat chassis that Dennis Zalowski had designed and built the front ends and suspensions and so on, and had different skin, had different seats and colors, and had the Scorpion look to it. And Brad Hewlings went out and actually, week after week, beat Team Arctic on their design chassis that looked like a Scorpion. And Edgar Atteen was really closely involved with that project, and was taking so much pride out of beating the Arctic Cat factory that it got to be really frustrating. And Brad Hewlings and Steve Thorson actually made us look like the B team.
The Arctic Cat and Scorpion teams charged full speed into the 80s, confident their dominance on the track would continue. But they were about to meet their toughest foes yet: poor snowfall and a weakening economy.
The early 80s were some dark times, for the power sports industry as a whole. We had 20% interest, we had 10-12% inflation, we had oil embargoes. I mean, there was just nothing going for the power sports industry. We had 2 years, 81 and 82, with no snow, virtually none.
Snowmobile sales were going down, and we were building way too much product. There were a lot of manufacturers building way too much product. We were losing money, and I believe it was in January of 1981 when most of us were laid off, when the company more or less was crumbling. Very devastating. Everybody had a love and passion for snowmobiling and for their job and what they were doing, so it was very disheartening.
Size of the industry in '72 was 500,000 snowmobiles to 82. A mere 10 years, they were down to 80,000 snowmobiles.
Arctic Enterprises production was geared to make 100,000 sleds. That was our overhead. We were making 35 to 40,000 those last couple of years. So we were just, and we were also financing our own dealers and distributors. So a combination of all that just brought us down.
I had probably 45 people employed in engineering. And he would come and say, well, you gotta cut back, you gotta reduce the number. So we'd cut back. A month or so would go by, and he said, well, things aren't turning around, you're gonna have to cut back some more. The last time he came, I think I had about 6 or 8 people left in engineering. And then he showed up and said, well, you're gonna have to let them all go. And I will never forget that day. I remember after they left, I was alone in that engineering building, all alone, bawling my eyes out. I remember going down, there was a engine shop right down below the steps from the office upstairs. The day that they all left, I went down there and I tore a 440 engine apart. Just tore it all apart. I don't know why, but I tore it all apart. And I put it back together again. Bawling my eyes out through the whole time. That was my life. That was 20 years. Sad times. And I wasn't sad for Roger. I was sad for all the other people. All the other people that had been a part of Arctic Cat, that had been a part of making Arctic Cat. The engineers, the purchasing people, the sales people, the administration people. There was no more Arctic Cat.
It was really sad in 1981 when the company actually had to close the doors. I looked around, and everybody that I knew, everybody that I hung out with, all my friends, close friends, worked at Arctic Cat, and we all lost our jobs.
In 1981, after we had had the unfortunate close down of Arctic, my housing value went to half, but I still couldn't find a buyer. That's how this community was affected. We had a lot of payroll dollars that weren't going anywhere anymore, and they weren't being recycled.
There was a project in place where Polaris was going to build some Arctic Cat snowmobiles. So Chuck Baxter, who was the vice president of engineering, asked if I would go work at Roseau to handle the engineering of the Arctic Cat snowmobiles that would get built at Polaris in Roseau. So I went to Polaris and I worked there for I think about 6 or 8 months. And then the project fell through. They ended up not building Arctic Cat snowmobiles. Mr. Baxter asked if I would stay on and work on Polaris snowmobiles. And of course I needed employment again, kind of like I needed employment in 1962 when I went seeking out Edgar. And so I tried that. And I had to work on the competitor snowmobile, okay? And awesome people up there. The engineers I had to work with, I had huge respect for because they were our competitor, and you always respect people who do get something done that's successful. And so I worked with these engineers and enjoyed them, but I could not get my heart into making a Polaris snowmobile a better product. I mean, it was a struggle. I mean, I didn't feel inspired. I felt like I was betraying the Arctic Cat brand by working on those Polaris snowmobiles. So I told Chuck that I can't do that anymore. I'm going back to Thief River Falls.
A group of former employees began meeting in a condo owned by Lowell Swenson. They knew that this was the last chance to start building Arctic Cats again.
So there was some financing to get together. Of course, there was word on the street that Arctic was coming back. And once they got things going, it was really exciting to see it grow.
And the small group that we had, we just didn't even think about the fact we couldn't make it because everybody just had the same vision, the same goal as we're going to do this thing, we're committed, and it's going to happen.
You know, Arctic Enterprise is DNF'd, right? And from that, you get a group of people who say, "Now, DNFing isn't all right. We're gonna gonna make this again. And that sort of come from behind, that come from the, you know, the depths of despair on some level, to build a company again. I think that is absolutely plugged into the DNA of Arctic Cat.
We came out with 2 models, basically. We had a Panther and an LT Gray.
84 machines, they ended out getting the new decals, bold new graphics, I think is what we called them back in those days, and that's what we came back with, was old machines with different decals.
You're gone for a period of time, whether you go someplace, you travel, and you come back home. It feels good. Coming back home feels good. And when we was able to crank up the line again, it's like coming back home. So it was good.
To see those come off the line was just one of the most exciting things that ever happened in my life, was to see that company come back and actually see the machines come off the line.
You know, at first it was just a tremendous deal. I mean, how much excitement can you express? I mean, beyond being really, really, really excited. And I think it took a while later, a few years later, and I said, you know, this is absolutely the funnest thing I've ever done in my whole life. And obviously, what made it work was this tremendous enthusiasm of all the people that had been involved.
Years later, a poster was developed showing Arctic Cat snowmobiles from every year. A Gone Fishin' sign serves as a placeholder for the 2 model years when no Arctic Cat sleds were built. These years have come to be known as the Gone Fishin' years.
I think when Arctic Enterprises went bankrupt, they had the highest customer service or customer loyalty in the snowmobile industry. And 2 years later, Arctic Cat still had the highest customer loyalty in the snowmobile industry. And kind of a pat on the back for all the good things that Arctic Enterprises actually did. They built a huge, huge base of customers that were loyal.
That was a testimony to me that said there's more to this snowmobile industry than just building product. There is customers out there that have become attached to that brand. The importance of the brand was so evident in 1983, because that's what allowed us to start becoming a company, an Arctic Cat company again. That brand loyalty is still important today.
Back at the races, back in those days, the Polaris people parked in one part of the parking lot, the Arctic Cat people parked in one part of the parking lot, Skidoo people, a few that there were around, parked in another part of the parking lot, and it was so segregated. You didn't even talk to the Polaris or Skidoo guys back in those days if you were an Arctic Cat guy.
Arctic Cat earned its legend on the racetrack, and you'll be happy to know we've jumped back into racing full throttle.
In 1984, shortly after the new Arctic Cat got started, Jim Dimmerman won the World Championship at Eagle River.
With an appreciative crowd cheering him on, Dimmerman drove down the backstretch and headed into the final corner. Years of frustration in the World's Championship race were about to be forgotten as Dimmerman turned down the home stretch to take the checkered flag and the title of World's Champion.
The sled handled really good. It ran like a champ.
And it's fun to win at Eagle River, isn't it?
Oh, I've waited for all my life.
But it would take a few years before the Cat was truly back in racing.
I was working for Ole Tweet and Brian Espeseth, and Brian came to us and said, you know, if we're going to get serious about oval racing, we got to get serious. And we worked out a deal with Steve Thorson and Dean Schwartzwalter, TNS Racing out of Fergus Falls, Minnesota. It was now down to who was going to be the driver. Steve and Dean said, you know, for the long term, we want a young, up-and-coming, young charger that we can mold. So we elected to go with Brian.
We got to Alexandria in 1987. It was their first race of the season, and it was, you know, a huge turnout for spectators. And the guys worked all night long, got it done. We fired it up at 6:30 in the morning in the trailer on the way to the lake just to go and do a little bit of testing with it before the race. So it was. I mean, talk about right to the bitter end, you know. But We were doing some little qualifying and bent the crankshaft on the sled. And here we were sitting there, and we have no spare parts. So Dean Schwartzwalter, he had his pilot's license, and he flew back up to Thief River, that night, got a crankshaft, flew back down, we rebuilt the sled, and we went back Sunday morning, and we won the Ice Le Mans portion, then we won the oval portion of it too, and here we have this little Q van that we're racing out of, and all the big executives are crammed in this Q van. Everyone's high-fiving after Sunday event, and stuff. It was pretty neat because, I think, we were just hoping we were going to be competitive, and then to go down there and win both sections of that first opening weekend was really something, and it was a big surprise for us and for them, so it was a good start of the season.
Much had changed during the gone fishing years. Like Arctic Cat, the I-500 race had also become a victim of the times. But industry insiders and the gang from Arctic Cat worked hard to revive it.
Roger Skyme was probably, he knew more than anybody the potential or the benefit from this cross-country racing, how much the consumer sled benefited from it. It was a tremendous test bed. Nobody drove a sled any harder than we did when we were cross-country racing.
If you had a sled break and it did not make 500 miles, it wouldn't make 3,000 miles with a consumer. So that what you fixed and what you improved really made a difference.
We were constantly trying to make our machine better because we wanted to beat them guys from Roseau. And they were doing the same thing up there. And the intense competition between Arctic Cat and Polaris is what's made the product that we have today.
And in 1987, the legendary event was back.
A lot of credit and vision to Ole Tweet, who was my boss at the time, said, we're not going to win the race, but we're going to win it someday. We need to be there. We had a prototype built in '89, and I took Roger out on the '89 EXT and what was going to be the 1990 EXT Special. We didn't go a quarter mile through the woods, and Roger stopped, and he took his helmet off, and he looked at me and he said, we will win the I-500 next year.
In 1990, a Western rider out of Driggs, Idaho, raced the EXT Special and made good on Roger's prediction, winning the I-500. His name was Kirk Hibbert.
Kirk was 25 minutes out of the lead. Kirk said, you know what? I think I can still win this. And we said, nobody's come from 25, 30 minutes down to win. He not only came from 25 minutes back, but he beat the next guy by 2 minutes.
Well, Kirk comes and wins the 1990 I-500, and Kirk moves here because he wants to compete in these biggest events in cross country. And it's a completely different style of racing. He comes to these first few races and he gets beat. It would be 9, 10 o'clock at night, and there's one trailer that's got a light on in it, and it's Kirk's. And he would work until 1, 2 in the morning. And the next day he'd race, and each week he'd get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. And within a year and a half, this guy who was used to racing all these huge bumps is now the fastest guy on ice. He's the smoothest guy. He knows how to set up his snowmobile. Did it with hard work.
Kirk Hibbert and his ZR440 continued their winning ways in late February by taking the pro class in the International Series of Champions Coke Classic 100 cross-country race. The victory gave Hibbert bragging rights to the overall 1993 International Series of Champions cross-country championship. And in the
he understood snowmobiles, and he understood what had to be, how snowmobiles had to be tuned and set up for all venues of racing.
He was just as hard in the beginning as the end, and that was his winning part of it, that I could see that when he went out and did his thing, he was very determined to keep that sled going just at its peak and not make a mistake.
We had this new lightweight Prowler, which had its place, but it never panned out to be a real good race sled. The nail in the coffin was Kirk was battling Jack Struthers through the woods on the I-500 again. And all of a sudden we got a radio call to the officials that Kirk had broke in the woods.
But they were bouncing against each other, and Kirk hit a tree or hit Jack Struthers and broke a spindle off the sled. And that was the end of, he was that close to winning in that year. And we worked quite hard to get to that point. And I remember we were at the finish line, and when we heard the news, and I remember Kirk and Roger Skyman and all the guys were sitting talking on the phone. And by the time we got back to the factory, and then within a couple of weeks, we had built a brand new sled.
And that was the start of the ZR.
New in the Arctic Cat arsenal are the ZR440 and ZR580. Their advanced design and high-performance engineering sent an instant chill through the competition.
When we started working on the ZR, it was in the era where our competition was strong. Polaris had a strong Indy. The ZR was putting all the things that was necessary in a snowmobile into place. It was understanding the need to have good brakes. It was a need to have the location of the rider be able to crawl up on the gas tank. The gas tank had to be shaped differently. The understanding the need to have front suspension that didn't have bump steer, that didn't have, that had the right geometry for caster and camber. And it was also the knowledge of needing to have a rear suspension system that would control pitch of the vehicle. Not just give you a good ride, but control pitch so that you could, that's where the torque sensing link came from, on the rear arm of the skid frame. The ZR was all that. It all got put together because we included people who lived that.
Brian and Hubert built a prototype, and lo and behold, we got it done to build that following November the very first 440 ZR.
And that was our sweetest sled. That really was a winner in '93.
Right out of the crate, the ZRs were first in race after race, sweeping the International Series of Champions Pro 500 class races, plus all 3 pro classes in the MRP race series.
That new innovative machine would soon be put to the test by Kirk Hibbert at the 1993 I-500.
Jack and Doug Lasher, the Polaris guys again, are ahead of them out of Grand Rapids. They're going to Thunder Bay. They get on this really tight, twisty, narrow river, and they got about 40, 50 miles to go to Thunder Bay. All of a sudden, this river comes out to a big river full of ice chunks and ice jams, and it's just the most gnarly thing you'll ever see in your life. Doug looks over his shoulder and sees it's Kirk. And I guess all hell broke loose. They just went balls to the wall, dicing back and forth, jumping ice heaves, and we could hear these snowmobiles coming, and they are dueling it out. And someone way down the river yelled, "It's Hibbert." And we could see the Polaris light in the snow disk behind Kirk. And lo and behold, here come Kirk, and he crossed the line with Doug Lasher on a Polaris right on his tail. And Kirk taking his hood off, or his helmet off, and telling us this story that, you know, we asked him, where did you pass him? He said, right back here.
So we couldn't be more proud of Kirk Hibbert for taking this year's crown.
After Kirk's dramatic win, Joey Hallstrom recruited a talented but unknown rider named Brad Paik.
Brad was a crop duster, flew his airplane up to Thief River. I met him out at the airport, brought him over to the factory, and there was no big contracts, none of that. It was just kind of a gentleman's handshake that he was going to race an Arctic Cat the next year. And he did, and boy, I tell you, history was made after that.
Brad Paik would win the I-500 back-to-back in 1995 and 1996 for Team Arctic.
The trick to finishing a cross country would be like a smooth riding style, but also, you know, your suspension is a big part of that. But there's different ways to ride the sled, and if you abuse it, you could break a chain before you get done, break some suspension parts. And then plus, if you miss most of the holes, it's easier to ride the day. So it's, I don't know if it's a lazier way to ride or what, but you just try to miss every hole you can miss, and that helped out a lot in cross country.
As if all that winning wasn't enough, it was finally time for the Chevrolet Grand 500 cross country race, the ultimate test of man and machine. Team Arctic finished 1, 2, 3 as a trio of ZRs crossed the finish line, adding to an already packed trophy case. Brad Paik led the charge, with Jeremy File and Kirk Hibbert right on his tail.
He was probably one of the smoothest, fastest racers, and went off to be one of the best racers that I have ever seen. He went to Eagle River one year with basically a cross-country sled lowered down, and I think he got like 3rd or 4th place.
Racing, looking back at it, it's very addictive from what I see. You just need that rush, that adrenaline rush every week, and it takes a long time to get over that once you quit.
By 1995, Team Arctic had again become synonymous with winning. They won everything, almost every class at Eagle River, new snowcross events, and they swept the I-500.
And I remember we went up to Spirit Mountain, and Kirk and Brian Sturgeon, and we had a few other drivers with it. We put on these first ZRs, and Arctic Cat hadn't dominated at Spirit Mountain for years, and we went up there and we won all the pro classes. I mean, it was phenomenal. And then that winter, the ZR went on to win every ISOC race. We won the I-500. We won all the stock classes at Eagle River. We won the Jackson Hole Hill Climb. We won the Alaskan Gold Rush Classic. We won every major race. It was phenomenal. To me, anything that won was beautiful. Didn't matter how you painted it or what you called it. If it won races, it was beautiful. And if it was the most beautiful machine out there and it didn't win, it was ugly.
Paul Dick won, I won, Brad won. I swept what they call the Triple Crown in ISOC. You know, it was an Arctic Cat sweep. It was the best year that I can remember that Arctic's had. I mean, I know they have a lot of great years, but that one was like the perfect storm, so to speak.
In the I-500, it was kind of known that Paul Dick was going to win the veterans class, and you had to beat Val Schlaben to win the women's class. And she had a heck of a string of those victories.
You know, I grew up in a family that raced and really competitive, and I didn't have any choice but to be fast.
Arctic Cat, Team Arctic, has had a long tradition of supporting women racers. I mean, in the period that I've been involved with Arctic Cat, you know, it's been racers like Val Schlaben, Gabby Rivard, Amy Zollinger, and Jolene Butte.
My very first race on Arctic Cat, I had so much wind going through that I frostbit my eyeballs. Because when the race was done, I took my goggles off, and it was still just as cloudy as it was when my goggles were on, and my goggles were clear as can be. So yeah, I had, in my very first cross-country race, I frostbit my eyeballs.
And she really became a dominant force when it comes to the women's racing, and still is today, which is pretty unique.
From classic ice ovals and cross country to asphalt and grass drags and the new snowcross events, it seemed like there was a race for every type of snowmobiling, and Arctic Cat was dominating them all.
You know, one year that really sticks in my memory is 1990, and it was kind of an introduction to me of Kirk. So he shows up at Jackson Hole, and you look at Snow King Mountain that they have to race up, and this thing literally, it's like a wall. This thing's like 45-degree angle, and there's rocks and stumps, and it's just gnarly.
It was in the final, Sunday afternoon, and they opened the hill up, meaning you could go anywhere, you didn't have to go through the gates. And I remember Kirk standing over to the side, actually, maybe sitting on a sled watching and looking, and these Polaris's went up there.
Well, Kirk's out there on a tiny little Prowler 440.
And goes completely different direction. And wow, this little 440 out climbing.
And he's zipping up this hill, and he makes it past the first catwalk, and you see where some other guys had stopped, and he just keeps going on this little Prowler. And
he went just high enough to go above where anybody else was on the Polaris.
He is the king of kings in the stock class on a Prowler 440.
Not even a Snow Pro. This was just a straight 440 Prowler. It was quite a feat, I would say. It was like, wow, excellent.
It was a capable snowmobile, no doubt, but really, that was Kirk Hibbert. That was Kirk Hibbert showing just how amazing he was.
And for Kirk to come into Jackson Hole and to pull off a lot of those victories early on was pretty exciting.
In 1992, Arctic Cat returned to the water with Tiger Shark personal watercraft. Within a few years, the model lineup had improved and expanded considerably. Unfortunately, it didn't last, because the personal watercraft market was oversaturated with product and dealing with environmental issues. By 1999, Arctic Cat had left the water again, but by this time they were already building something else.
Yeah, the new Arctic Cat ATVs are great for work and play. Only trouble is, sometimes it's hard telling which is which.
I can remember calling Ole. I was driving my family down to Minneapolis in the middle of the summer for something, and calling him on the phone and saying, you know, I'm counting more ATVs in the back of pickups and on trailers than I am counting watercraft. So maybe we've guessed wrong. Maybe this watercraft business isn't going to be as good as, and the ATV business is going to. So we began working on a chassis and then began working on Suzuki to supply us the engines.
I started working with Ole and others at Arctic Cat on a new project. It was a secret, nobody could know about it. We called it BICLIC, best in class, least in cost.
And that all came together in, we actually were working from the early 90s, but it all came together in 1996 when we came out with our first build of ATVs.
Honda and some of the other Japanese manufacturers had been out selling three-wheelers, but unfortunately there was a lot of accidents and then a lot of lawsuits, and then a lot of concern about where the industry was going and everything else. And ultimately, Suzuki had been in the market, and you got to give Suzuki credit. They were the first ones out with four-wheel ATVs and really had some nice products. But they decided that maybe they would like to have us pick up some of the ATV business. They could still make engines, and it was kind of neat because they had also been developing an engine that was the biggest in the industry, the 454. And so we were the biggest guy on the block for, I think, at least 3 months. and then players took their 450 up to a 500. So, but we had a claim to fame that at least we could use for an introduction.
As the ATV market blossomed, riders wanted more and more power.
Introducing the all-new Thundercat. The biggest, toughest ATV ever. Hop on and feel.
In 2007, a state-of-the-art facility was erected in St. Cloud, Minnesota. And for the first time in history, an Arctic Cat-built engine rolled off the assembly line.
We needed to get larger displacement engines, and we didn't have a source for those. And we said, let's build our own engines. And we put a plan together of what we thought we wanted to do. And we started out with the 650 engine, and from there we progressed to a 700 and a 550, and then we have our 1000 engine today. So by doing that, we've been able to create our own path where we wanted to go for vehicles and engines.
Here's the thing, Arctic comes out with ATVs, and and the focus is, we're gonna build utility ATVs, right? Because people that use ATVs use them as utility machines, and indeed that's the biggest part of the market. But this is Arctic Cat, and the culture there is to be competitive and to want to be bigger and faster. And so yeah, we build utility ATVs. Well, pretty soon there's a 650 ATV, and then there's a 1000 ATV, and then we're going to Baja and we're racing, and we're doing the Quad Terrain Challenge and racing, and they can't help themselves.
We got a phone call from Daryl Rath. Daryl knew some of the people here and said, there's this new circuit coming out there that's it's for all-terrain vehicles. Most ATV racing is with sport bikes, and he said, this is actually for utility vehicles. Are you guys interested? And I believe it was like a Thursday, and said, if we're going to do it, we got to get together here in the next couple of days because the race is coming up and I got to leave. And got together with Ole, and Ole loves racing. He goes, let's do it. So we literally took a stock 650 out of the crate, put it together, sent it down to Daryl. Daryl, in fact, came up here and picked it up, put it together, went through the rule book, the necessary things we had to put on and what we didn't, and Daryl went racing, and at the end of the year, we ended up winning the championship of Quad Terrain Challenge.
And it was just a matter of time before they'd be at the races, and they'd go race Baja, and they'd win.
So the following year, Jesse West, who was an employee here, Jesse said, you know what, I'd like to do that. So Jesse raced for us the second year, and we repeated back-to-back. And so that was really good. You know, we had back-to-back victories in all-terrain racing. We were approached from Bipolar Racing. They were big into Baja racing, and we started participating in the Baja 500 and 1000 just to see how well our product would hold up. We were the first UTV to cross the finish line, and we got first and second that year. And so it was just outstanding for us, and we enjoyed it. We learned a lot about the product and how to take what we learned racing and put it in there and give that knowledge to the customers out there.
For some, only the toughest, hardest working ATV will do.
I think Arctic Cat has developed unique types of ATVs that have allowed us to expand into other parts of the country or with different consumers, like the TBX. Mud Pro, spin off of what a lot of people like to do where they're allowed to do it, is ride in the mud and see who can outpace their buddy. Why don't we build a machine that fits that market? And we did with the Mud Pro.
We also raced that. It's been very successful for us, and you know, a little idea that came out of the south went to you know, up to Canada and also to Alaska. So it's been a rewarding project for us.
It's also this attitude of we just have to build something bigger and badder and meaner and faster than anyone else, and they do that. They constantly do that.
The Wildcat was something that we seen where side-by-sides are going, and we seen the performance side of the side-by-sides being evolved, and said, you know, that's something, we already had the utility recreational side, and said we should get in the performance side.
You know, there was that hole in our lineup in terms of being able to compete with some of the other products that are out there. So we knew it was something we needed to do. It was something we needed to get to market as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we wanted to make sure that when we came to market with something, it wasn't just a Me Too product. This was something that had to be different. We wanted to go ahead and leapfrog the competition and really make a statement with this product. It's unlike any machine that we've ever built.
The ZR was one amazing sled, but the next evolution of snowmobiling was about to take place.
Customers liked four-strokes in other things like outboards, and I know they're inherently different than snowmobiles, but there was a trend underfoot that we were sensing, and they said, you know, at some point, this is going to happen in the snowmobile business as well, so we better get working on that. So we began with our partner, Suzuki, and we began working on what would be a good four-stroke snowmobile for the market as we knew it at the time.
So one of their engines that they asked us, or that they brought out, was it's called the K6A. It's that first 3-cylinder liquid-cooled 660 engine made in one of their little microcars in Japan. And I thought about it a little bit, and I says to Chris, I said, so let's get one and try one. So an engine was shipped over to us, and we put it in a snowmobile and took it up onto the frozen lake. This was later in the spring. And what we found was this little car engine was just whisper quiet. And all the other noises of the snowmobile came out, such as the steel skis banging on the hard snow, the howling of the track, and so on. So we started working on those areas to quieten it down.
Bill Howell and Clyde Seeley from West Yellowstone came to us and said, hey, we're going to get thrown out of the park, and we need a four-stroke. You got to have something. And the Forest Service made their big announcement that they were going to throw snowmobiles out of the park because they were too noisy and they smelled and all these kind of things.
You know, and I believe that those concerns were justified. There were an awful lot of snowmobiles. The two-stroke snowmobile needed to have some improvement and so on.
And we were able to raise our hand and say, now what is it you didn't like about these? Oh, try this.
I was sent out to Yellowstone for a meeting with the Park Service people and showed them the snowmobile, and they liked it, and we agreed to have them take delivery of a couple of them, just kind of as a trial basis.
It makes sense that we should be allowed to have more snowmobiles in the park in the wintertime, particularly since we have the new clean, quiet Arctic Cat 4-strokes, which was the salvation of the park as we see it.
And it answered every one of their concerns. And so I really believe that we Arctic Cat saved snowmobiling in the park.
Those first machines demonstrated in the park were called Yellowstone Specials. Arctic Cat's leadership not only saved snowmobiling in the park, but began a new chapter in snowmobile technology.
The initial engine was a 660cc car engine. This is a small car in Japan. And then we did the Z1, which was the first engine, 4-stroke engine designed specifically for a snowmobile. And then we did the turbo on top of that.
The drag racers really liked this. Again, it was clean, it was fast. The way they make these drag tracks and they spray this compound down on the asphalt, they don't spin a quarter of an inch. They lock right up. And our Z1 turbo, with some slight modifications to the engine and things like that, cracked off 137 miles an hour.
At the same time Arctic Cat was developing 4-stroke machines, they had higher aspirations.
You know, Arctic Cat had Mountain Cat, and they had some solid machines that were built to go in the mountains and in the deep snow. But we get into the decade of the 2000s, and they say, you know what, we can do something a whole lot better. These guys were all mountain riders, and they knew what it needed to be great boondocking through the trees. They knew what it needed to be great to go ripping up a hill and set a high mark. And so they brought the best stuff that they could get, and they molded it and shaped it and tuned it. And they really just dedicated themselves to saying, hey, we are going to build the best mountain sled we can. And they did.
The M series now are probably one of the most popular models that Arctic Cat sells because there's always snow in the mountains. You have to stand up on the machine, the snow's coming up over the windshield, hitting you in the chest. That's as good as it gets. It's just, you don't want to park the machine. Ride till you're out of gas.
You think about sort of the culture of snowmobile racing in the 1990s. It was oval racing and cross country. And towards the latter half of the 1990s, snowcross, which had been around and had popularity, but it wasn't huge. It's the winter of 1998, and for the first time ever, snowcross and maybe even snowmobile racing gets seen by this generation of kids, people who are into extreme sports, and what's not to be blown away by it. I mean, these machines are screaming 75 miles an hour and launching to 100-foot distances in some cases, and clearing 10-foot high jumps along the way. Machines are loud, and there's bumping and there's crashing, and people's eyes open up and their jaws drop, and they think, man, this is something.
Timing of the jumps and the focus of bumps and things, it's timing. It's just pure timing. The speed and the attitude of the machine to get from this bump to the next bump and without being straight up or straight down. And it was, sure, the shock absorbers and the engines all played a part of it, but I give a lot of credit to these guys. It's a different balance of machine that I was used to.
This kind of happens at the same time that a few racers like Blair Morgan show up, and they're standing up on their machines, and they bring a motocross background, and bang, snowcross is it.
Kirk Hibbert took on snowcross as well. But his biggest contribution to this new sport was passing that great racing talent on to his son Tucker.
He always wanted to ride sleds, so when we were there, he was, I always had a sled for him to ride. Well, then he's occupied and he was off riding, and he was quite good at it, even as small as he was. Like I said, he couldn't hit the running boards in a couple of them sleds that we put him on. And
had the privilege of watching Tucker when he came. He was just a little kid, and I remember him, he had a Yamaha snow scoot. He literally wore that little thing out. He wore the snow out in the yard. He rode it day and night, and he started riding Arctic Cat snowmobiles. I remember him as a junior Didn't take very long when he was a junior that his talent showed through, and he moved into the semi-pro classes, and it didn't take long when the semi-pro classes his talent showed through, and he was in the pro classes. An awesome snowmobile racer.
At the same time the new generation of snowcross racers was doing monster jumps, another young gun at Team Arctic named P.J. Wanderscheid was winning world championships at Eagle River with stunning regularity. And Brian Dick added another I-500 title to Arctic's trophy case. Racing and winning remain a big part of Arctic Cat today, and what's been learned has created the most incredible products yet.
We have the snowmobiles we have today because of the model that Edgar taught me back in the early days, and because of people who want to make a difference. And I got some good people in snowmobile engineering that want to make a difference. I'm so thankful for them. And I'm so thankful for the young generation because they are so into new technology. They're into the computer age. I've got engineers that have worked for me for 35, 40 years. And they've got a lot of institutional knowledge in their head, these engineers. And I call them my gray-haired friends. And when they get tied together with new generation of engineers, I think you get a pretty strong team.
50 years later, it's hard to believe Edgar Hateen could have imagined his dream becoming as strong as it is today. That dream created a machine. It created a sport. It created a passion.
Share our passion. It encapsulates the company, the people, the culture, the dealers, the customers, I mean, everybody. And you can't no denying it. I mean, we own passion.
There's truth in that. Share our passion, because it is passion that moves people. It's passion that moves me.
I can sit and talk about snowmobiles or ATVs, whatever, for days. It's exciting. Everyone takes pride in what they do. I mean, it's a fun job. You're building something fun for everyone to do, whether it's as a family or at the racetrack. And really, you do see it when you go through the factory too.
I can remember on one of the earlier products that we were launching, and people coming up and say, "Hey, you got to come down and see this coming off the product line." And, all this excitement built up, and you go down there and you can literally only see the front half of the machine. It's still not even completely built, but they were still so excited about seeing this new product coming off the line. So, that kind of excitement doesn't exist. This is not just a work for most people here. This is a way of life. I mean, this is their passion. This is what they do.
You start talking to customers and you start looking at the breadth of what Arctic Cat has done over all these years, and the theme that I kept coming back to was passion. Passion from the people that work at Arctic Cat, who've dedicated their lives to building and designing and finding a place for snowmobiles to go, and passion of the riders themselves. I mean, how many photos I've come across in the last months of people who have 20 snowmobiles parked in their garage and their vehicles are sitting out on the driveway, and who spend their summers thinking about snowmobiles and ATVs. And I can't think, I do a lot of different fun stuff in the world, but there isn't any group of people who is more passionate than those people.
I was never a racer, That seems to be the easy place to go, where everybody, oh, you're a racer and you're at Arctic Cat, and everybody at Arctic Cat races. It's been more about the family experiences and things like that. I have a good friend who has a cabin about 4 miles from me, and we have a big ride, over the New Year's. A big group of us. It's a lot of fun. All cats, a lot of old ones, and a lot of new ones, and we ride. riding and being with my family and my friends, and that's what it's been more about for me. I guess that's how my passions reside.
I've loved snowmobiles. You know, we had them in the 60s, and you know, when we finally bought our snowmobile, I think us kids bought one in 1969. It was like it was Christmas every day. I look out the window and, you know, we had our own snowmobiles. So, you know, why not work for a place that builds fun?
And you know, as I look back over the years, Edgar didn't really give me a job that day. He really gave me a life, is what Edgar did, because I'm so thankful that I've been able to do this for almost 50 years now. I will grow up one day and I'll want to be a cowboy, but I don't think that I'll be able to ever forget totally and leave totally the creation of Arctic Cat snowmobiles and racing.
This is the year to get moving. This is the year to be where it's at. This is the year to take winter and live it. This is the year of the cat. This is the year.